Hello and welcome back to another episode of The Best Biome, the podcast where we discuss the most undervalued, most neglected, overexploited, the absolute darndest, bestest biome there is. Mm-hmm. We're talking about grasslands. And we're your favorite grasslands PR team, by the way. Mm-hmm. I'm Alan.
I'm Nicole.
And I'm Rachel. And I am going to talk about one of the most darndest grasslands. What an intro. I'm Rachel, and it's my time to do an episode. So I decided it had been too long since I did an episode entirely about a specific ecosystem.
Nice.
And you know what I have had on my list for a long time on my little podcast ideas barn document?
Yes. No.
Mongolia.
Whoa.
Oh my gosh.
Specifically, a really specific grassland.
Okay.
Which is spelled Horqin.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. And I looked this up multiple times. It is pronounced the Horqin Grassland.
Okay.
Of Inner Mongolia, which is actually in China, not the nation of Mongolia.
Mongolia as a region, not as a political boundary.
Okay, well, yeah, hang on. Inner Mongolia is an autonomous region of the People's Republic of China. So it belongs to China. It's technically an autonomous region called Inner Mongolia, and it is different from the country of Mongolia. But it borders, it's like kind of in between the border of Mongolia and China. And the Horqin Grassland is specifically not only in Inner Mongolia, but like overlaps a little bit with some of northern, like technically mainland China, like area. So it's like up in like the north part of China. I have a picture.
Ah, yes. Okay.
It's the part in red.
Oh, that's an enormous region.
It's very long and skinny too, which is weird. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And this landmass up here is Mongolia, which kind of sits in the cradle of the top of China. Uh-huh. Yeah. And so that is the region we're talking about today. So it is technically part of the Mongolian steppe, which we have spent a lot of time talking about because a lot of really cool wildlife lives on the Mongolian steppe. Yeah. And this is a really significant area for grasslands globally. Mm-hmm. And this specific grassland is really interesting because, and not to be like super dark. There's I swear there's positive stuff in here, like really cool, interesting positive stuff. But it is really well known for how degraded it is.
Wow.
Yeah, which is like shocking and recognized as a bad thing because of how significant this grasslands area is and how significant the grasslands culture is in this region. So yeah, we're gonna dive into that today. What's weird for me is that most of the discussion I see about the Horqin Grassland is not even really about wildlife. I had to dig to find out what even animals live there because so much of the discourse around this region is involved with how important it is to the people groups that live there, and also specifically the degradation of the landscape and how interesting that is.
Is this like a huge agricultural area?
Oh my God, yes.
Like, because it's like, I don't know. Okay. There's like large cities not far from this region.
No, yeah. There's very large cities pretty close by. It's not that far from Beijing. And this area, this grassland, specifically the Horqin Grassland, is one of the birthplaces of Mongolian grassland nomadic culture, like going back into the Neolithic era, right? And it's one of the places where that nomadic system has been sort of preserved and protected, and it still exists to this day. And it's recognized as a globally important agricultural heritage system, which is a huge mouthful, but basically like it's regionally and culturally extremely important and birthplace of the grasslands nomad culture.
Crazy.
which,
Cool.
formed the inspiration. If you're unfamiliar with the Mongolian culture, first of all, follow those creators on TikTok because it's very interesting.
It's so good.
So good. Also, I think this is like the inspiration culturally for like the Game of Thrones grassland nomad culture.
Okay. Yeah, sure.
I forgot what they're called, to be honest. I haven't thought about Game of Thrones in ages.
Yeah, I have no idea.
There is so many delightful content creators in Mongolia with like showing the very like the rural like rustic lifestyle is fascinating.
Yeah.
It's really very cool. And what a beautiful area also.
Seriously. Now what's interesting to me, okay, when I was trying to research this topic and find out what about this ecosystem was interesting or different, I was coming across two very different accounts. On the one hand, if you search for Horqin Grasslands, you will find pictures of beautiful, lush rolling hills, yurts, nomadic herders, and just, the most beautiful, luscious landscapes full of grazing animals, right? On the other hand, like when I was trying to search for scientific papers about it, like I went to academia.edu. I searched Horqin Grassland. 2 results. And I was like, what?
Wow.
That's insane.
That is insane.
And then I found another term in that paper called Horqin Sandy Land. And when I searched for that, I had close to 30 results.
Sandyland.
Yes. Come closer to the mic.
Oh, sorry.
No, you're good.
So, okay, a Sandyland.
Yes.
Is that what it sounds like?
Yeah. And in the literature, there's way, way more research specifically calling this region the Sandy Land and not the grasslands. And again, when you Google this region, you find luscious, does not look like a desert.
Yeah.
But that's the story of the Horqin Grasslands, is that
Interesting.
it is a famous grassland area that is undergoing significant desertification specifically. Because as we've talked about before, the Mongolian steppe, an arid, semi-arid grassland. And as is a trend in a lot of grassland regions across the world that are in this sort of temperate climate, one of the risks for climate change of this grassland is desertification, or the transforming of this grassland into desert. And in this specific case, basically turning into sand dunes,
Wow.
which is wild. And you don't see those pictures if you Google it. So yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, okay. So,
So just to paint a picture, the Horqin Grasslands is the largest grassland in northern China. At the same time, it's also one of the 4 largest sandy areas in northern China. You're good.
yeah, okay. Well, there is like actual desert in China, right? Like there's the Gobi Desert, but this is
For
not
sure.
that.
No, this is degraded grassland.
Okay, so when they're calling it Sandyland,
Yeah.
like what is the soil like then? Like
Sand.
It is actual
Like
sand.
literal sand dunes.
Really?
Yeah.
That's weird.
Isn't that so weird? So, okay. I want to paint like a geographic picture sort of. So, the grassland region in China, and again, this is one of the largest grassland, or the largest grassland region in northern China. Important. China has like 1.3 billion people in the population. There's limited farming opportunities. Grasslands, as we all know, extremely vulnerable to human pressures, especially when it comes to farmland. And China has the second largest area of grassland in the world, which I thought was wild, 400 million hectares. And 90% of China's natural grasslands have some degree of degradation. And with the distribution of this grassland in northern China being in a more poverty-stricken region with really fragile ecosystems because of how arid it is, this is a really, really vulnerable grassland, and again, super important. And I want to point out, we'll talk about this later, but China obviously recognizes that this is an issue for its people, for its culture, and it has prioritized grassland restoration and protection. So more on that later, but this is like a known problem that's been worked on for like decades.
Okay. That's good at least.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the Horqin Grassland is part of the China Biosphere Reserve Network, which makes sense because, culturally, there's buffer zones, there's human settlements, there's natural preserves. So it is protected and part of the Biosphere Reserve Network.
Nice.
Pretty cool.
Okay. Good. Yeah.
In Mongolia, and this is kind of tricky because, it is technically China. Inner Mongolia has more ethnic Mongols than Mongolia does. So it is very much like Mongolian culture. Horqin means a man with bows and arrows. And it talks about, or it's like referring to the nomads that lived in this region. Over time, Horqin evolved from being a tribal name into the term for that geographic region. And the famous Horqin Grassland in the beginning of the 20th century has changed into the current Horqin Sandy Land. So basically over the course of a century, this went from being referred to as the Horqin Grassland to being referred to more as the Horqin Sandy Land because of that degradation that's happened.
My gosh. Yeah.
Isn't that wild?
A fast turnaround.
And so that's kind of synonymous for the Sandyland. And the Sandyland technically covers an area that's like 52,000 square kilometers. So it's a significant chunk of land.
Yeah, it's big. That is crazy. Okay, there are like 3.5 million people living in Mongolia, right?
It's
it's something
a
like
lot.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is like compared with 1.3 billion living in China. It's really weird. Like, why? Anyway, yeah.
Right?
Yeah, it's like this is like such a hugely important area and yet very strangely sparsely populated. That's neither here nor there. Just the weird thought.
Let me tell you a little bit about the ecology of this landscape, and then I'll mention some of like the human tie-in. Like, we are not an anthropology podcast, but it's just such an important part of this region that I'm going to mention it a little bit. Yeah. So on the ecology side of things, there are some really notable nature reserves here, like the Horqin National Nature Reserve, the Shanghai National Nature Reserve, and the Horqin Sandy Land is a sensitive ecological region that's considered to be like in the agriculture pastoral transition zone. Basically means there's a lot of farmland happening and a lot of pastoral, like grazing herd land, basically like rangeland in Kansas.
Gotcha. Okay.
And the landscape is sand dunes that alternate with these like lowland rolling hills.
Well, I mean, what's the difference between a hill and a sand dune? Just
look,
like
there's a really significant. Okay, well,
because like if you take the plants out of a hill, doesn't that kind of become a sand dune?
Yeah. Okay. So apparently, I learned I'm not a desert person. Obviously, I'm a grassland girl. I don't know very much about desert ecology, etc. Mm-hmm. So what makes something a sand land, I guess, in this context, has to do with how mobile the hills are.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sure.
So like, how much are the hills moving because the wind is just moving loose sand everywhere?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, if you have enough like root biomass to keep it in one place as a hill,
then it can be a sandy hill.
Yeah.
A little bit, but there's like different terms for these different like how mobile the sand dunes are, basically. Yeah, wow. And that is a good way to measure how degraded the habitat is. Yeah. Especially if it's like, oh, this is supposed to be a grassland, but this is a sand dune that like changes every weekend or whatever. I don't know how sand dunes work. Because the wind is blowing it around, Yeah. Okay, so the climate too here is temperate zone, obviously. It's semi-arid monsoon. So 70% of the water is being dumped in like 3 months, and then the rest of the year it's like windy and dry as hell. So not great for sand dune prevention if it's just windy and dry for most of the year. But that's just a part of what makes the Mongolian steppe just, the Mongolian steppe. Anyway, sucks if you're trying to stop it from turning it into a desert.
Yeah.
As far as animals, which again, I had to freaking dig for this information. A lot of the animals that they actually consider to be special to the region are specific livestock breeds that are found there and nowhere else.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. Nicole, this is up your alley. But they do have, in Inner Mongolia broadly, 114 species of wild animals. I think they're considering this like mammals. 20% of China's total, with more than 50% being commercially valuable. And I guess they're not including wild animals as including birds. I have to think a lot of these sites or papers that I was using were translated because some of the English was a little bit awkward. But they also note 364 bird species, which is 31% of China's total bird species.
Wow.
Nice.
Yeah, are found here in this region. A bunch of these, more than a dozen, are listed as rare animals. 49 species of animals and birds are under national protection in this region. Some of the rare species include things like the Mongolian wild ass and camel. And this is like the Bactrian camel, obviously. And some of its like reindeer are exclusive to Inner Mongolia. And the regional bird is the lark, but they're really famous for cranes too. There's in one of those national reserves I mentioned, they have 6 different species of crane, and it's kind of like the crane hotspot for all these different crane species.
Nice.
It's very fun.
You could expect
Love a good crane.
especially if there's 6 of them.
Okay, then just for my clarification, you said it has. It sounded like earlier you said it gives 20% of the something, but I didn't catch what that was. 20% of the 50% of something.
25% of China's total is what the language said in the source that I used. Total wild animals, I guess.
Oh, like total
Species.
like biodiversity or.
Yeah, but again,
Okay.
wild animals isn't including birds. So I'm not sure like the translation there if that's like mammals or what.
Okay, but still obviously
It's
a biodiverse area.
Yeah, and it accounts for a lot of China's total biodiversity, which is interesting.
Gotcha. Okay.
So that does make it significant, right? You would expect to see things like Mongolian rabbits, Mongolian wolves, a bunch of unique fish species, roe deer, and yeah, that's sort of the region. It is a grassland.
Yeah. No, sounds great.
Yeah. And it is also one of the most seriously desertified areas in this ecotone. By 2012, almost 80% of the region suffered from some form of desertification. And it's been found that grazing is one of the first causes for this desertification. Now, a little bit on the people and this nomadic culture. I already told you it's globally important. This grassland nomadic culture evolved in part in this region, right? And because of that, this sort of traditional nomadic like lifestyle and like production of livestock has been really well preserved here and still exists here. So we can track a lot of the roots of this grassland nomadic culture to this region. And this like really unique environment also gave birth to this sort of interdependence that the people here have with the unique livestock. Sheep, goats, cattle, horses, camels, and other livestock. This region birthed extremely unique breeds and extremely unique animals that have been exported globally. There are unique Mongolian sheep, Jawuda beef, Hanshan white cashmere goats, Mongolian horses. Like there's really unique livestock breeds. And this is like an ancient relationship here. And that's really the important thing that I want us to take from this. Because that makes it a unique challenge for trying to do management, because it's extremely important to preserve people's livelihood, to preserve this unique way of life, and to preserve the environment, because the way of life is intrinsically tied to the environment. And so like the pressures here to preserve this region's ecology are really, really intense, you know, because the way of life here and the persistence of people groups and just people being able to live a comfortable life is extremely dependent to the survival of this specific ecosystem. And that makes it a really cool case study for a lot of the, like, how do we reverse desertification issues that this region is facing? Because, lots of, like, they care about actually reversing it for all of the above mentioned reasons.
Right.
Yeah.
What percentage of China's like beef, goat, sheep, like what in terms of production?
Yeah.
Like what comes? How much of that is tied up in this region?
Dude, I honestly have no idea. I may have encountered that data, but I didn't think it was interesting, so I didn't write it down.
Well, yeah, no, sure, it's not. But I mean,
it would be interesting, yeah,
because
it's supporting. I mean, not just the people that live there. I'm sure it's supporting other, parts of China.
Sure.
I mean, Beijing is very close by, so I have no idea.
I just wondered if that was like, since there's so much grazing pressure, I wonder if like, okay, well, are they like depending on this region for a lot of, output of meat to this incredibly populous country? Like,
I'm
is that where that's
sure that's true. And I also encountered this with regard to farmland too, because as we know, grassland conversion to farmland, very common because that's the soil type that's great for farming. And that is a problem in this region. So not only is this land being used for grazing, but there has been a lot of conversion to farmland in recent years to feed the growing population in this region of China. So, I'm sure that it's significant in what it's producing for people.
Sure.
Which again creates huge challenges. So and there's like a lot of really cool stuff about, if you look it up, just the history of the people groups here and the indigenous wisdom that they have for managing the landscape and managing the ecology of the landscape. A lot of cool stuff that is threatened by desertification. So
you said that it's an ancient relationship. So like how close?
Neolithic.
Okay. Remind me what that means again.
That's like ye olden, like a petroglyphs eras,
Okay. So like, are we like in tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands?
Yeah, we're talking like 10,000 to 2,000 years ago is the Neolithic age. So this is the Stone Age period that these cultural groups, we have like evidence of the people groups living here developing this nomadic culture.
The cows that they're raising here bear a direct lineage to like the wild type of animals that would have naturally been on this area. Like,
I mean,
is that,
yeah.
what are we
Why
talking
are you
about?
A lot of them are like there's heritage breeds of especially cattle. I want to say cattle are especially like old, that are thousands of years old and like are still around today, virtually unchanged. So like, there's the Livestock Conservancy. There's a lot of different groups out there that are dedicated to preserving these breeds because they are so old and so culturally significant.
Yeah.
And some of them are horribly rare, like a couple hundred. Like,
yeah, there were things listed that I had never heard of before, and I was like, wow, that's wild. Like, what is this like weird specific cashmere goat, right? And this would also be the region where like Bactrian camels would have been domesticated. So pretty significant lines of animals.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay. I was just curious because I don't, you have like agriculture being continuously practiced in an area by a people for that long. It's like the ecology sort of shapes with the culture. I guess. You know what I mean?
100%. And the culture absolutely shapes the ecology too. I think that's why it's important to mention people in this context, because it's so tempting as ecologists to remove people and be like, what would the land be like without people? And it's like, this land would not be the land it is without people. This land is shaped by people. And that's true of so many grassland areas because they're so tied to human evolution. The timing just lines up with human development in different regions. So, this ecosystem would not be the ecosystem it is without this like coevolution alongside the human culture that shaped it.
Sure.
For sure.
Which is such a cool thing.
Very cool.
Yeah. Yeah. So desertification is an issue that especially impacts grasslands. Just to give you an idea of how impactful this topic or the specific type of degradation is, 32% of the world's population is impacted by desertification, and 40% of the land area worldwide is directly or indirectly affected by desertification. Grasslands are very intricately tied to the way that this process is expected to impact humanity and land, because so much of it is grassland that's impacted. There is a United Nations convention to combat desertification, and they are still trying to make progress and figure out what on earth to do about this issue. The United States is a member of this convention, but we have zero plans or interest in actually participating in it. I did look this up. Nicole was there with me in the same room, and I was yelling because I was mad about it.
Yelling.
Because this is something that affects, North American grasslands too. We're extremely concerned about it in the West, the short grass prairie. There's Chihuahuan grasslands that are becoming increasingly desertified. This is something that impacts us too. We're a member of the convention. We've done literally nothing to contribute anything to making a plan to combat it in our country or anything like that. So pretty typical United States nonsense, honestly.
Yeah.
Way to be a global leader. When was this commission founded?
A long time ago, actually.
I was going to say, this is probably not a
90s.
This is not a new issue.
No. This is like the 1990s or 80s. I forgot to write it down. But I was also curious because I was like, how long have we been a member of this committee and not done a single thing with it? Decades.
You could be so far ahead of the game if you had done something 30 years ago about it.
Yeah. Italy and Spain have action plans for desertification for their countries and stuff. But yeah, we don't. Super interesting. Anyway, so it is a global issue, and the Horqin region has sort of, because it's such a landmark, grassland desertification problem that we can see happening before our eyes over the last 40 years. It's been a really great study place for this global issue. Okay, how do we reverse desertification? This region of China motivated to fix it. So let's study this and figure out what we can learn about grassland desertification. How can we stabilize it? What is happening? So the result of desertification in this short grass steppe type environment is a number of moving, semi-moving, and stabilized sand dunes. That's what it looks like. And that's, like I said, basically how we track how desertified the area is. And this is related to just how much the wind is sweeping across these rocky areas. It's water erosion from monsoon seasons, just crumbling rock and soil into dust, and then the winds just whipping it around into these moving or semi-moving dunes. There was a study in 2017 that was pretty huge that looked at the last 40-ish years of desertification data for this region. So we have a map of what has happened, and actually the results, while being oh god, no, bad stuff happened, pretty positive too. So that's really exciting.
Okay.
So basically they found that yes, desertification in Horqin is the direct result of climate change and human factors interacting. They basically found that these different climatic factors are sort of the background noise to how much human disturbance is going to impact the environment, if that makes sense.
Sure. Yeah.
Yes, I think so.
Yeah, so that's cool, because what they found was there's a huge variation in how the climate is impacting the region, but ultimately the human influences were more significant and were the driving factors in what happened, which means we have a lot of control over these changes, even though the climate is changing.
Sure.
Pretty great stuff.
True. Okay.
Yeah. Now, because this sort of fragile ecosystem is really vulnerable and fragile to climatic factors, that's an important component that just needs to be factored in. And having a lot of long drought like we'd expect in these regions makes it worse. So let me show you some cool maps. This is really hard. This is hard to parse out because it's like different time periods basically is what it's showing. Okay. So this first map, there's like a big red chunk down in this region. That's where most of the desertification is happening. Mm-hmm. That's desert nonsense. This is 1980s to 90s. This is 1990s to 2000s. This is 2001 to like 2013. This is the overall trend. So as you can see, the red part, there was a lot of desertification happening up until like the 90s or the 2000s basically. And then in the 2000s, there's like a reversal almost. So the desertification in this little like really susceptible area stops becoming degraded to a significant degree. And I forget which color it is. The viewers can't even see it, so it doesn't matter. The dark green and the green is reversed desertification. So the dark green is significantly reversed and the green is reversed desertification.
Oh yeah, that's impressive. Okay, so what intervention happened then in the 90s and 2000s to shift that?
A lot of interventions. Because basically what they found was the main thing that was causing degradation that was like actually impacting whether it happened and to the degree that it was happening is grazing, which, okay, slam the brakes. Like that's important to the people living there. Like how do you stop that? China was like, well, that's what's making it happen. So we're going to stop people from grazing. And they had a grazing ban.
Dang.
On the on the entire region? Like
I could not find that answer.
Like how big of a region are you talking about in the map here? Like on that map you just showed us. Like what is that in terms of, do you know? Or it's because this is like a huge area.
It is a huge area. This is I couldn't tell you honestly.
It's okay. Yeah, I was just curious.
It is like what is entirely considered to be the Horqin Sandy Lands was what the study was looking at. Okay. Which goes into Inner Mongolia and a little bit of northern China where it overlaps a bit. Because, ecological regions don't look at political boundaries. Yeah. So there's a lot of complex things at work here. Overgrazing, inappropriate human activities was driving a lot of it and putting lots of pressure on the landscapes. And the way that they combated this was twofold. What seems to be the most significant change was twofold. Number one, artificial efforts to basically stabilize the region to let it recover. Second thing was only excluding grazing from the sensitive areas. As far as I can tell, there were specific regions. I could not find information on like what were the regions that were excluded. But it was described in this paper from 2017 as a national grazing ban. So I think it was a national program that like it seems like delineated which areas it was inappropriate to graze in. Sure. And grazing was straight up banned in sensitive areas. But it's very obvious to me as well that grazing was still allowed in areas because like there's no talk about like these cultures being prevented from their lifestyles. And I mean, it's obvious they're still able to graze in the region, but they were just restricted and straight up banned from doing it in certain regions. And it turns out if you just allow the landscape to recover on its own, sometimes that's enough. And it can just bounce back from being a sand dune to stabilizing vegetation. And the degree to which this happened is significant. Like just excluding grazing from some sand dunes was enough to like cause stabilization of the sand dunes. So it went from being moving sand dunes to stable sand dunes with like like increased vegetation structure in like a decade.
That's wild.
I mean, that all makes sense though, right? Because like, I mean, no grassland is really adapted to perpetual, constant disturbance.
Exactly.
It always has to be intermittent disturbance. Like, so like, yeah, that makes complete sense. If you just give it a break for a minute, it will like start to be fine again.
Right? Isn't that wild? And there's been like huge efforts implemented by the Chinese government specifically to reduce grassland desertification. So several national ecological projects. I'll just list some names of them, like the Grain for Green project, which was started in 1999, still goes on. There's something called the Beijing and Tianjin Sandstorm Source Treatment Project, which went on for a decade. The 3 North Shelter Belt project started in the 70s and has been going on since 1978 and continues to this day. And all of these efforts include just like billions, like hundreds of billions of won that have gone into it too. So they're just dumping tons of money and energy into these projects. And that's not like an exclusive list of all the different projects ecologically that have been implemented just to fix grassland degradation.
So they also try to fight wind erosion, it sounded like, too. Like,
Yeah. And I do want to mention also that the grazing ban started in 2003. So they began banning grazing from sensitive areas in 2003, which is right when like desertification started to be reversed in a lot of these areas. So, I mean, that's been 2 decades now where these efforts have allowed some of these landscapes to recover. And that's really freaking cool.
it's very cool. Like,
that would never happen here.
no, that's exactly what I was gonna say. I was just gonna say we would never dictate to the beef industry like on that level.
No,
as a country.
That was my immediate first thought too. Somebody else was in the room when I was researching this at the first time too, and I can't remember who it was, but I was just like, my God, the United States would never. We would never tell corporations or landowners, you need to do this thing to protect your land. You are banned from, like, we would let corporations especially burn this land to the ground before we would tell them what they could do with their beef industry. Yeah.
I mean, overgrazed pastures are a dime a dozen. In our country, and but it will never change.
Unfortunately. And you know, with the grazing ban, what that did for this region was, you know, not just allowing vegetation to, you know, have reduced pressures, but it also really stopped like trampling pressures too, because, you know, like we've talked about, having herds of animals in grasslands beneficial because of the trampling, but that is a major impact on the landscape. And when you're combating something as severe as like erosion into sand dunes, trampling can have a significant impact. And even if it's just goats and sheep, like that's still significant.
Well, because like it turns over at some point from like, okay, these large herbivores are like, they're like turning over and aerating the soil by walking on it to like they're just now compacting it and making it less, right? Like that will happen at some point.
Totally. Yeah, so that's really cool. Let me tell you about the other method. So obviously grazing ban is allowing it to restore itself. But there was like artificial efforts too. And these two things in tandem were shown to be the biggest impact. So the way that they stabilized it was something called, they called it straw checkerboard and shrub planting. And they called this, the researchers called this artificial assisted reconstruction of the grassland. I think basically what it was creating like a checkerboard of like a straw covering over the dune. So like checkerboarding like uncovered and covered areas, planting shrubs that are regionally, you know, prominent into those checkerboard areas. And then because it's like artificially stabilized, that assists in new vegetation growth, establishing and further stabilizing the dune.
No, you're kind of giving it a little head start.
Yeah. It's like when you're like looking at construction projects and they put that weird like netting over the bank.
Does it do anything?
I don't know.
I don't think it does, except for add pollution back into the riverbank that they're trying to stabilize. Stupid.
Yeah, but at least in this case, it's been shown to be a major contributor to stabilizing sand dunes and helping that restoration. So yeah, combo, artificial and natural, just letting the freaking land breathe for a little bit.
You have
That's all it takes.
throw nets on the sand dunes to keep them from getting away.
No,
Yes,
but it's not even
yes.
nets. It's a checkerboard of straw. Like,
Yeah.
I couldn't find pictures of this, but I did see the results of it, which was some of these Sandyland regions looking almost like the result looked like an orchard almost.
It's all,
Because
yeah.
just like
Specifically
lines
planted.
of plantings, and then orchards have like freakishly short trees, so it's like little shrubs, just like. But yeah, just across the landscape, and the result being stabilized.
Fun.
Sandy land.
Nice.
Yeah, pretty cool. Yeah, tons of money poured in. I mean, that alone takes a lot of effort, but it's worked, and so that's amazing. And I guess I don't know what the extent is of desertification in a place like Western Kansas. I saw a book at the library the other day that looked really interesting about the water table in Western Kansas and the desertification process happening there. So maybe further research podcast episode incoming.
It's a big topic right now.
Yeah.
Very controversial.
Right. But as far as I know, there isn't a significant like sand dune type issue occurring in the shortgrass prairie. As far as I know, again. So, this is pretty significant degradation, and maybe that's why China has put in so much effort in addition to, it being important culturally. Yeah. But it's nice to know that there are methods that work.
Yeah.
Not only to stop it from happening, but to reverse it. Like that's positive. Like, could you ask for more positive grassland conservation news? Yeah. Honestly, the only bad thing is that overall, the grassland has suffered because of farmland conversion. Mm-hmm. But that's a separate issue, and is also trying to be mitigated. Like they are putting money behind that problem to preserve and recover native grassland. Mm-hmm. So, there is still effort being put in to prevent that destruction.
But it is very encouraging, though. You are correct.
Yeah.
Like, if you can get people and producers and scientists and governments all on the same page, like about, hey, let's make sure this doesn't become like the Sahara Desert in the next 10 years.
Yeah.
Then it's like, you can actually make some change happen.
Yeah.
Yes.
And it's like, hey, we're seeing this change happening now. Let's do something about it before it gets to an irreversible point.
Yeah.
Yes.
And that's what you have to do if you want to prevent catastrophe.
Yeah. And everyone benefits, but it's just a matter of, getting everyone on the same page.
For sure.
Yeah.
I wonder if there are regions within the Great Plains that could be considered sandy lands, because there are you've got sand dunes in Nebraska. You do have sand dunes in Kansas.
There's sand dunes in Kansas for sure.
And in Western Kansas, there are some very if you go to the Smoky Valley area, Little Jerusalem. Yeah.
There's sand dunes right outside of Pratt.
There's very sandy areas there. Yeah.
Oh my God,
even
right.
Quivir is extremely sandy.
I always assumed that was because of the Great Plains used to be an inland ocean, but is it also partially because of desertification? I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't really have a good pulse on
Right. Yeah. And, like I pointed out, even if it's a stable sand dune because of the vegetation structure, that's still potentially desertification happening and at risk, especially under grazing pressures.
Sure.
Apparently, of turning into just loose, mobile sand dunes that are going to create a cascading effect of just desert.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Wild.
Oof.
Yeah. Woo. Crazy. So to summarize, I guess there has been rapid reduction in degraded grasslands in the last couple of decades. Restoration projects have been effective and successful. And this is important to know because the potential risk of this continuing to be an issue is extraordinarily high. I have not mentioned this yet, but just like in Western Kansas, in this region of China, there are huge concerns with falling water tables in the region. There are little lakes across the Horqin Grasslands that are considered pretty significant ecologically that are becoming less and less, are extremely volatile in whether they're even present. And the overall water table of the environment is shrinking, which is a hallmark for even more desertification in the future. And so, the risks from climate change are going to become more significant probably as the future marches on. But knowing that we can mitigate some of those changes by altering what we're using the landscape for and by artificially helping, awesome. And so hopefully we can maintain people's livelihoods and the ecological livelihood that those things are intertwined with. Yeah. Here's a quote from one of the studies. Quote, "As always, there is a trade-off between environment and development. More effort and wisdom are needed for further restoration campaigns in the Sandy Land." And the relationships between man and the earth in this area form the foundations for survival and progress. That's what they said. So, if they can do it, we can do it too. They perhaps have more motivation than other regions of the world, but I believe that we can find the motivation inside of us to also preserve our way of life and our environment that our livelihoods depend upon.
Maybe in 10 years when it starts turning into desert.
Eventually, yeah.
Eventually we'll have to care.
Yeah.
But hopefully before then. Hopefully before then.
Yeah. So, okay, sorry, not to get I tried to end on a positive note, but this does, again, make me very worried because, like you pointed out, I am not fully aware of the degree to which desertification is already happening, even in my own state.
Yeah.
So,
me either, yeah.
As you're saying, in the future when it becomes what if it already has? It probably has, to be honest.
Well, I think it'd be a good, something to touch on later in this season would be to look, at what is the current developments in this. What are the current developments with aquifer loss, with, climate resilience, what's our status, in terms of where are we at?
Yeah.
Where are we at?
That's great. Our end of the year episode is a review. So, let's just make sure that's on the review.
Yeah, buddy.
As we're researching it.
Yeah, I'd like to know. It is very cool. This is ultimately a very encouraging story. Not only just from a lot of different perspectives, but it's also just very nice that there is cultural significance here. That they said this is part of the tapestry of our people.
Yeah.
So that is also something that they strive to preserve. It's not just looking at the functionality of the land. Yeah. It's this is part of our identity. So it's worth saving. You know what I mean? That's very good. I like that.
There's definitely a transactional thing going on with,
sure.
how can we make sure that we preserve economics, etc.
Sure.
But it's not to the degree that I feel like we have to, in this country at least, justify any kind of environmental action.
Yeah. We're it's that is how it feels, certainly, in this country, that we are less concerned with the intrinsic value of things.
Yeah.
And it really has to come down to dollars and cents.
Yeah.
So it's not, I don't know. That could change, though.
It
could change.
Yeah.
We can make it happen.
Yeah,
we can make it change.
Yeah, those lands are dollars and cents. So,
yeah, that's true.
Has some power behind it.
When you factor in ecosystem services and all that, then people are completely missing a huge part of the dollars and cents usually in these equations. So,
yeah, definitely. Yeah. But you're right. It sometimes feels to us, because it's so obvious that these things do have intrinsic value, it feels nice to be able to look at a landscape and say this place is just important because it is.
Yeah.
Because it matters to us.
Yes.
And therefore it's worth protecting.
Yes.
The animals, the freaking rolly grassy hills.
Yes.
That matters to us.
Yes.
End of story.
The 10,000-year-old goats. All of it.
10,000-year-old goats.
Yeah.
They achieved immortality.
Ooh.
Oh,
Good for them.
yeah.
Rachel, what a good episode.
I'm glad it was good. I was so worried.
No,
it's good,
it's
good.
It's what an interesting story. I liked it. Nicole, what are your thoughts? Give me your thoughts.
I loved it.
Okay, good.
Thank you for listening to The Best Biome, produced by Grassland Groupies, our nonprofit. You can find show notes, Rachel's sources, contact information, all that good stuff in the episode description below. Do please give us a review, share with a friend, and spread the love of grasslands. We'll catch you again in 1 month.
Oh, yeah, we're done. Okay.
Oh, wait, bye.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
Hug your nearest sand dune.
Yeah.
Stabilize it
Aw,
with your
yeah.
arms. Bye.